My name is Nikki Buffa. I am a partner in Latham and Watkins, Orange County, and DC offices. I work in the Environment, Land, and Resources Practice Group, and I'm very excited to be here with you guys today. So this panel will cover siting of current and future wind energy areas, and specifically, we're going to discuss sea space challenges with offshore wind, including avoiding and mitigating impacts to sensitive habitats, fishing grounds, vessel routes, and marine protected areas. And we're also going to explore how responsible siting in the Pacific can balance offshore wind development and sea space challenges. So I'd like to welcome our panelists up on the stage. All right, so real quickly, my plan is to run through a few questions that I think might be interesting. Hopefully you guys agree. And we'll focus on the expertise of each of our panelists. So let's start by introducing them. I will say that their full bios are on their website. They're all well worth the read. I'm just going to do titles for now. So first, I'm happy to introduce Chuck Bonham. Chuck, Director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And then we have Jenn Eckerle, Deputy Secretary for Ocean and Coastal Policy at the California Natural Resources Agency. And Executive Director of the Ocean Protection Council. Also with us, Scott Flint. There he is. Environmental Program Manager for Renewable Energy Policy and Planning at the California Energy Commission. Mike McGinnis, who's Principal Consultant at Bioregional Planning Associates, and he is an environmental advisor and consultant to the Santa Ynez Band of Chumash Indians. And finally, we have Jennifer Miller, the Chief of Renewable Energy Section at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. Welcome, everybody. Okay, so an introductory question for everyone. We're going to start with Chuck. How would you describe your agency's role, or actually entity for Mike, in siting wind energy areas? Chuck?
It's great to see everybody. Thanks for the invitation, Nikki. It's great to see you. I would say two words describe our department's role: historical and contemporaneous. What I mean by historical is we trace our department roots to 1872, and the state constitution created something called the Board of Fish Commissioners, arguably the first entity in the nation to manage how many fish and animals people can hunt and catch and traffic in commerce around. So the things that happen in the ocean, the coastal communities in California, we have long extending roots back to that beginning of statehood. So as developers and participants in this space, when you run into the hardworking man or woman who still makes a living fishing on the ocean, in many ways, that's one of our historical people for our department. Contemporaneous. A lot has changed since then. Today, our relationship with tribes is dramatically different. We're engaged in executing a series of co-management agreements around the state with tribes. We're also juggling climate change in our daily decisions, whether we permit people to fish or not, how we might protect seascapes in the ocean in partnership with other state agencies. So it's historical and contemporaneous when we come to the question around siting for our department.
That's great. Thank you. And Mike, what about you? We'll go down the line there.
It's a hard question because, you know, I'm not a part of an agency, but I've worked with agencies.
Yeah.
And, you know, the fact is that one of the questions I always ask myself, why am I involved in ocean issues or coastal issues, is, you know, perhaps it's a childhood memory. And most of us, I think, were involved in ocean issues in one way or another because of our childhood, if we grew up near the coast or we grew up near river time, near a river. And I grew up right next to Bolsa Chica. When I was 7 years old, I walked barefoot out to that wetland with my wagon, and I caught my first halibut in that wagon, and I brought it home.
You had a permit, right?
Yeah, I had a permit. But
It's Huntington
ironically,
Beach. I mean, does anybody get permits at Huntington Beach?
I live right next door to a oil derrick that I heard all night pumping, you know, with that oil coming out. So I think I may not work with an agency, but I have agency. And I would also say that that agency is a blue agency. It is, my body has been shaped by an interaction with the ocean and fishing and surfing and interacting with an atmosphere, a beach, the salt water, which is in my veins. And so I think I'm here as a blue agent. And, you know, thinking about the tribal work that I do as a consultant, it's always about thinking about the sacred and that everything is sacred. And when you grow up near the ocean, everything is sacred. It's the spring winds and the flowers and the dunes and the bumblebees that you might interact with that make something sacred. And the question is, how do we make something more sacred or less sacred? So when we're thinking about developing offshore, whether it's oil or some other use, it's about keeping in mind that blue sacredness that we all depend on for every other breath that we breathe. And so I think I'm here in some ways representing that blue agency.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Jennifer, I mean, Bonham, you could talk all day about your role in siting. Maybe we can talk also about your definition of siting for the purposes of this panel, in addition to Boham's role.
Yeah, so, you know, when I'm thinking about siting, or when Boham's thinking about siting, you know, our primary role, our mission is really to provide access to energy and mineral resources on the Outer Continental Shelf. But how we do that, you know, can be done in a number of ways. And so the way that Boham thinks about it is through stewardship of our ocean resources, you know, understanding that these are the nation's resources and the resources of all of us, and how best to manage those and protect the environment and also provide access. And it also has to do with science-based decisions. And so when we talk about science-based decisions, you know, that's where I'll bring in our understanding of what siting means to you. Because in all reality, siting occurs at every step in the process, at every step in project development. But when I think of siting, I think of where the leases are going to go, where the area is going to be auctioned. I'm really thinking about that area ID stage. And there's a couple of different stages within that area ID process, but that to me is where I think of siting. And, you know, to get back to Boham's role in siting, you know, we really see ourselves as stewards of the Outer Continental Shelf. We see these decisions as really, really important, and so we try and make science-based decisions using a rigorous, you know, highly reviewed scientific literature. And then we also have a lot of, our goal is to have, you know, the utmost integrity. And that's integrity on a professional manner when you're dealing with individuals, when you're making decisions, and also integrity behind our science and our science-based decisions. And that's really how we see Boham's role.
Great. Scott, what about the Energy Commission?
So the Energy Commission is the state's primary policy and planning agency for energy matters in the state. So everything we do is concentrated on helping the state meet its ambitious greenhouse gas goals, and we are working fiercely to see that the electrical sector of that meets its goals and contributes to that. One of the hallmarks of our agency is the public process that we bring to everything, and I think when Bohm first came to California in 2016 and we set up the first intergovernmental Bohm California Task Force meeting on offshore wind, we took on the challenge to step up and reach out to communities up and down the coast, potential affected stakeholders, tribal governments, to engage and educate on the technology and the processes, educate on how the need for offshore wind and how it fits in California's energy portfolio. And we've been working fast and furious to keep up with that ever since. Yeah. I think that's never ending, and we're proud to have that role, and we'll continue to do it going forward in the offshore wind space.
What about you, Jenn, CNRA?
Yeah, thank you. So, the Ocean Protection Council is a cabinet-level state policy body. We are not a regulatory agency, but we have this broad, ambitious mission to protect California's coast and ocean, and we do that through advancing science-based policy and management, making strategic investments, and really helping catalyze action through partnerships, both within state agencies and outside. And so our role in siting is really making sure that we've got best available science informing the decisions that we're making about where these places should be sited. And so we've made some, and we're really prioritizing protecting and minimizing impacts to the environment, to cultural resources, and to fisheries. And so we've made some accelerated investments already in environmental monitoring to help us understand where those appropriate or suitable siting areas should be for offshore wind. We've invested in cultural resource inventory, and we've invested in fisheries mapping, fisheries ground mapping, to really just help us understand where are those areas of high sensitivity and conflict, so that we can advance the state's ambitious clean energy goals while also minimizing impacts to things that we all really value in California. We also really play a key role in convening not only our state agency partners, but external partners as well, because if we're gonna do this and balance these values in the state, we all have to be leveraging resources and pulling in the same direction.
Absolutely. So Scott, we've been hearing a lot about kind of responsible siting, and I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about kind of what are the proactive planning elements that are part of kind of the ideal part of responsible siting?
So, couple things. So, as folks, everyone should know, there are a couple things going on in offshore wind right now in California at the same time. One of those is working to implement the BOEM leases and move those sites forward to project development. And so one of the focuses of the work of the agencies has been, as we heard earlier, doing research, developing a permitting process, laying out the way that we work with developers going forward during the site assessment process, so that we can learn as much as we can during that process after the first round of leases. But secondly, we're also looking forward under AB 525 and the direction of the legislature to identify additional space to meet California's ambitious energy goals. And so AB 525 asked the Energy Commission to set those goals, and we did that at 2 to 5 gigawatts by 2030 and 25 gigawatts by 2045. And then we're also tasked with looking at what it would take to meet those. Where are the areas of the new sea space that we would look to site that energy? So we're early in that planning process too. And then also a couple things related to that, also look at what it would take from a transmission perspective, a workforce perspective, and a ports development perspective to see that vision for 2045. And so we're working on all of that in our proactive planning process. So the word responsible was in that question, and I think responsible planning is doing what's right. So we doing it what's right and the right way, or the best way we know how to do that. So we're trying to get ahead and identify issues. We're using available information on a short timeline to try to really look at identifying areas and the conflicts that might occur there. That's not my word, that's a word that people love, conflicts. I don't love it so much.
Deconflicting, conflicts.
Challenges or whatever there, and so that we can use that best available data to proactively examine those and start the conversation about what happens next. So what folks see come out of sea space planning for AB 525 is not the end point, but the starting point for that conversation. And being responsible means that not only are the agencies partners, we're partners with BOEM, but the affected communities are partners in the planning. And so that's what we're working hard to do.
That's great. I'm wondering if anybody else wants to chime in here on the panel on kind of elements of proactive responsible siting. Chuck, maybe something?
I'd like to offer a lesson learned. So I love California, and you can feel the energy when you come to a room like this. I think most of you see a similar excitement and opportunity. This governor looks to the future, and those of us in his administration are trying to keep up. Turns out most of our population lives within proximity to the coast. And when you ask them, and Jenn is more expert than me, overwhelmingly they respond in all kinds of different polling how much they care about the coast and protecting the ocean. 90% or more. I've been around long enough, turns out I'm the longest serving director against sometimes my better judgment, that with some of you, I experienced the beginning of land-based renewable energy with President Obama and Governor Brown. We built out solar in the Mojave Desert in a way that was a lived experience. And in the last couple of years, our department's permitted, maybe in 2 or 3 years, about 25,000 megawatts, 6,000 megawatts of storage over about 500,000 acres. Not nearly the scale ahead of us in the ocean. The things I've learned are, let's talk together as soon as we can. Having that conversation is the single biggest determinant factor how siting plays out with regulators on the land side. Secondly, the sooner we're talking, the more we can shrink scientific disputes at the beginning of the process, which turns out, according to McKinsey, Lean Six Sigma, all of the work I do in transportation and housing drives delay. So open the door, come with empathy, and we can get done what we need to do by that communication commitment. I think that's a defining feature of responsible siting.
Absolutely. Great. So Jenn, I enjoyed your cameo yesterday at the CEC Symposium on data, because Secretary Crowfoot put you on the spot.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if you can expand a little bit on that conversation. So thinking about kind of what actions can be taken to ensure consistency and transparency throughout the siting process, and particularly thinking about data collection, sharing, analysis. How are we actually going to get all that done?
Yeah, so first I think it's just building on what everyone has talked about just now, and that is we need to communicate how we're making these decisions and what data we're using to base those decisions. And then acknowledge that there are gaps, right? There are unknowns, and we need to continue to fill those gaps in order to improve our siting decisions. So that's one piece. I think the other piece that's really important is making sure, you heard a lot in one of the previous panels about the importance of having, solid monitoring, potentially having an entity that's coordinating that monitoring. I work for the administration. I can't take a position on AB 80, but I can say that there is value in having some coordinating group that's helping us understand what monitoring efforts are underway and where those data gaps are so that we can fill them. And then the other piece that's really important is standardizing our protocols, our data collection, so that we can not only have consistent analysis to make those decisions, but we can also use those protocols to build on existing monitoring programs, and then have consistent data collection and analysis as we're funding and investing in these new monitoring programs.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. Mike, let's throw a little curveball here and talk about the National Marine Sanctuary proposal and what will it be like to do siting when you kind of throw that layer on top of it.
I should say that I worked with the sanctuary program during a very turbulent period offshore California. I was a member of the Marine Reserve Working Group, which was the first state attempt to designate marine protected areas within the Northern Channel Islands, the 6 nautical mile area of the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. And so I worked through that process with them, not just as a stakeholder, but as a consultant. And then I worked on a whole series of other things related to the sanctuary and their updated management plan. And now I have the benefits of working with the tribe that's also a supporter of the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. I'm familiar with the statute, its ambiguities, its strengths. I think in some ways, when it was passed in the late 60s, in the middle of the 70s, it was probably the most progressive federal statute because it supported marine ecosystem-based planning and to protect marine life. And, you know, in some respects, this whole concept of ecosystem-based planning and adaptive planning and the like, which are on the tongues of a lot of folks, has been put to test in a lot of other places, including up in the Pacific Northwest for the Columbia River and other places. And it's hard to do ecosystem-based planning. We don't manage the ocean, we manage people and how they use the ocean. And in many respects, the sanctuary mandate has a unique feature, and that is compatible use. And compatible use is ill-defined within the court. And compatible use, if you think about it, means there's sort of a hierarchy of values that we get from a sanctuary or within a sanctuary. And protecting marine life is a priority goal. And use sort of follows from that. But it's very difficult to sort of test a use like wind energy offshore against this priority mandate, which includes compatible use. And so I think from a tribal perspective, I'm not a member of a tribe, but I would imagine, since I'm working with the tribes, that this concept of compatible uses may be useful to work out when we're designating a new sanctuary that has a cultural heritage as its foundation, which is very fortunately compatible with the Sanctuaries Act. So cultural resource heritage and ecosystem-based planning are sort of integrative goals within the sanctuary legislation and the courts that have followed in terms of defining that concept. And it's a unique opportunity, I think, to think about wind energy as potentially a compatible use within that boundary of a proposed sanctuary. But it's going to be difficult to sort of tease it out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you want to weigh in at all on the sanctuary piece.
You know, BOEM is a partner, you know, to NOAA as they're, you know, going through this process to, you know, to designate the marine sanctuary. And, you know, I think BOEM's perspective is to try and be the best partner that we can, because we see the ocean as, you know, a multi-use place where there are a lot of ocean users. And so far, I think the conversations and the development has been good. You know, I think we're pretty happy with how things are going and the coordination between our two agencies. And so I think, you know, when it comes to this particular case, we can have many winners, I hope.
Okay, so Chuck, let's say we're all talking sooner, and as you suggest, what are some of the kind of challenges we're going to be talking about that you see? What are the big, significant challenges coming your way?
Mental sanity, and just kind of seriously reminding ourselves to take a deep breath when we get frustrated with each other. This is ambitious. On one hand, for our department, it's uncertain when we look out at this future. You all are going to pioneer novel technology in a place that's not been tried. In the middle of the California current, I think it's fair to say the California current is like no other place on the planet. So we're worried when we think institutionally about what that future looks like, knowing the value we put on the biodiversity that exists across that current. On the other side of the ledger, we are living climate change. You are. But 3 years ago, we noticed salmon swimming back from the Pacific Ocean, arriving at our hatcheries, swimming in a counterclockwise circle and dying. Turns out, working with NOAA and doing research, they likely have thymine deficiency. Every living organism needs thymine. The warming of the current off our coast potentially has caused salmon to shift their diet to anchovies disproportionately. anchovies block thiamine in the salmon. And I've had to close crab fishing more regularly each year because the migration of whales has shifted due to the prey abundance of krill, which is directly related to the ocean condition. So we're kind of anxious about how we're all going to go through this experience, combined with we've got to go through it because we need this development to occur in a responsible way to have a chance of defeating those things we're dealing with daily. Maybe it's a juxtaposition, a paradox, I'm not sure. But we can do it. And it comes back to us working through it together with empathy for each other, constant, regular, early communication.
Okay, so Scott, on the theme of challenges here, how about some challenges that we haven't talked about yet that you're seeing or you might see as you try to identify additional sea space areas?
So I'm not a director of anything anymore, so I get to be in the weeds. So
Great.
I can share a little bit about that and actually working at the commission to identify additional space. One thing is that it gets really deep really fast off the coast of California. And for instance, when we look at areas that are within 1,300 meters of depth, that's about 0.8 of a mile, if that helps. The water depth is 1,300 meters, but when we look, that's the extent of where we have looked for the first set of call areas that came out in 2018 and have become the lease areas. So they're already in 900 to 1,300 meters of water, which is deeper than anyone has, I think, contemplated deploying offshore wind. So that's a challenge, but when we look to where to put more areas nearer the coast, there are lots of existing uses and users, and so where we're looking to de-conflict or have a little lower conflict areas, they tend to be a little farther out in the ocean. So if you look progressively out, California does have a lot of offshore wind potential, and it's been talked about in reports for the last 5 or 7 years, but I don't think anyone visualizes where it's really at. So if you look out to 2,600 meters of water depth, for instance, it gets deep so fast it doesn't add that much potential capacity. And then we're talking about 1 mile and 1.4 miles to reach the bottom in those areas. When you look out another increment to where the ocean levels off again off the coast, it's already 2,900 to 3,000 meters in depth, and that's almost 2.5 miles. And so the technical challenges, the scale of development for those sorts of areas is probably beyond technical capabilities for meeting our 2045 goal. So that's one of the challenges, just visualizing where this is and working through the issues that come with the unique way the California coast developed and exists now. So that's just one example. There will be challenges for users. There will be challenges for developers as we go forward. It's better to know those challenges now so that we can start to deal with them, so that we can move forward with deploying the technology.
Right. Let's say we've identified the challenges, we're doing some siting, we're thinking about some additional siting, now we're going to do some monitoring. So Jenn, this question is for you. How can the responsible agencies, so we're thinking about the feds, the tribes, the states, the local agencies, support a kind of long-term monitoring program for offshore wind?
Yeah, so, I talked about some of those early kind of accelerated investments that we made to help inform siting, and our council just approved a couple of weeks ago funding to release a competitive solicitation to develop an environmental monitoring guidance for this work. And this is really going to help us create a framework for what we need to be looking at in order to not only characterize local impacts on a project basis, but the cumulative impacts of deploying, multiple wind farms over, miles and miles and miles of the ocean. So keep an eye out. That solicitation is going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks, and that will really create the framework for how we're going to build the monitoring program out in California. And that's really, really important because, as we've heard over and over again today, this is new here, and it's deep, and we've never done it before. And so monitoring is going to be key to understand not only baseline conditions, but what's happening during construction, what's happening during operation. And it is also key to us as state and federal agencies being responsive to things that are brought to our attention. If we're seeing issues, we can only track them if we've got strong monitoring, and some of that is happening in real time, and some of it is happening over larger scales. But we can't adaptively manage, and that is the key to kind of doing this in a face of uncertainty and pioneering. So monitoring and adaptive management are going to be key to our success here.
Makes sense.
Nikki, could I just add one?
Yeah, please.
So as a department with maybe the most amount of scientists generally in any state agency, the way we make it through uncertainty is exactly like Jenn recommends, monitoring and adaptability. I would make the case quickly, and this may run against competitive advantage and disadvantage between business entities. Those that go through first, there's a community dynamic to how we handle creating monitoring with those that are first that can produce long-term benefits for the entire industry. So getting the monitoring right as soon as possible is mission critical in our view.
So Chuck, since we're on you, what other kind of things are you guys as an agency setting up? What are you putting in place other than thinking about monitoring to prepare for siting, both for the additional and current kind of offshore wind areas?
Two things. One is kind of feeling out our own space in our family of sister agencies. While we have this long experience on land and the history in the ocean, our regulator role doesn't play out in the ocean exactly identical to how some of you know us in land. So as we work through that, we need to be a part of that portfolio of state agencies. Maybe you're not directly interfacing with us always in a permission relationship as a regulator, but certainly as the state's trustee agency on all wildlife and resources in the ocean, we should be closely wed to the Energy Commission, to the Coastal Commission, using the availability of the OPC as kind of an overall kind of governance knitting as a role helping for where these things are going to play out in the decision space.
So Mike, what about you? I mean, how do you see kind of the tribes playing a role in siting and the relationships?
I think it's very early. I think in some respects, I kind of building off the discussion, one of the things I studied with a bunch of support from the National Science Foundation was this interface between science and policy with respect to restoring wild salmon and the proliferation of watershed organizations and councils and conservancies that you see across the West Coast, starting in about the late 1980s. And one of the things that we found in our funded research was that there were a couple of really important things that were part of deliberation and negotiation and collaboration. One is the role of local knowledge. And tribal people have a lot of potential local knowledge that can be very valuable in any negotiation about a place, or siting a structure or whatever. So sort of embracing the importance of local knowledge, which is one epistemology among many epistemologies. Science is an epistemology. It reflects a worldview. And so science-based communication is important, but so is local knowledge. And the other thing that I think we began to sort of discover is often in any place-based decision-making situation, you're really negotiating ecology. There's a range of different folks involved, perceptions and values, some folks who are well informed, others who may not be well informed, and that you want to create a space, an open space for negotiation. And one of the things that I think tribes are facing today is that, for example, within the broader Chumash traditional territory, there are many different clans and tribes. They often do not get along. And in a negotiation or a place-based negotiation, I think it's very important that we share the resources necessary to cultivate a common constituency within a region of sharing information, openness, equity, empathy, very, very powerful. Understanding the other in a public space. And the earlier you do it, the better. If you produce a lot of science and just deliver it in a bunch of academic type reports, it's going to fall on deaf ears. Because often you have unfavorable information that influences people's negotiation. And unfavorable information is the key determinant in adaptation. How do you receive information as an individual? How do you receive unfavorable information as a member of an agency?
Right.
Is another question.
And we have that question kind of for Jennifer, actually. So you're getting a lot of feedback, I'm sure, right? And between the two wind energy areas, now we've got 5 provisional leaseholders. How are you guys incorporating all of that feedback that you get?
So we are trying to learn from our experience. And I think you can see that through a number of actions that Bonham has taken recently. We put out the modernization rule that was years and years and years of work. I cannot express how long we worked on the modernization rules and how much effort went into that. But we are continually trying to do better and to be better and to do it better. And I think you can see that not just through the modernization rule, but through the implementation of draft wind energy areas. This is one of the mechanisms that BOEM has recently introduced for the areas in the Gulf of Mexico, for the Central Atlantic, for areas off of Oregon, and for areas in the Gulf of Maine, where we are using NOAA, one of our agency partners, and the National Center for Coastal and Ocean Sciences, NCOS, and their team that does a lot of suitability modeling. I think it was used off the coast here for aquaculture identification of areas. We're taking that path to try and show our work, to put out all of the data and information that goes into that area identification phase, and then provide an opportunity for ocean users, stakeholders, federal, state partners, tribal nations to comment on those draft wind energy areas before they go final. And we introduce that as directly from feedback that we received on our process, where all of our agency partners, tribal nations, stakeholders, ocean users were saying, these wind energy areas come out, we don't get to see them, they go final right away. We want to have input, we want to have a voice in this. So we introduced something beyond our regulations to try and provide that voice and increase the transparency in our process. You can see that through the California leases, where we included community benefits agreements. That was a strong request from the state. We try to take the priorities of the state and then incorporate those into the leases as best as we can possible. So we are constantly adapting and listening and trying to do better. That doesn't mean that everybody is going to always agree with the decisions that we make, but we are really trying to be very honest and open and listen with our ears and respond accordingly.
Great. So Scott, thinking about, as folks are gathering feedback and data, do you see gaps? Do you see that there are some, potential for evaluating other impacts that we are not currently evaluating?
So in the realm of AB 525 and looking for additional sea space, we started out with assembling the best available data, and then we evaluated that data by going back to the experts who derived it and also got their opinion on how to best use it. And the truth is the data is limited and it's not consistent. It tells us we have lots of data about different things, but it tells us little bits and pieces about different things we need to know. So about marine mammals, it might tell us about one set of marine mammals, it tells us where they occur. But then for another set of mammals, it might tell us more about the intensity and how they use the habitat. And it's not consistent that way across the thing. So those are obviously, that identifies a data gap already that we need to know more about how the species are utilizing their habitats out there. So that's one data gap. For marine birds, we have better data on where they occur and some about the density, and we're starting to get some information on their potential vulnerability to the technology. And so that's another data gap. It's a new technology that we haven't had in this environment. And so there's a data gap there on how are they using the habitat, but how they actually interact with what structures we want to put in the water. And then I think thirdly, there's just some data that doesn't exist. Earlier panels talked about avian impacts and birds and bats. I found 0 bat data so far. So we're starting at square one for bat data. CEC and our partner agencies here have funded and co-funded a series of work to help start filling those gaps, and BOEM is through their science work is starting to fill those, but it's slow. It takes slow to do validated science. It's a slower process, and so we need to use that best available data in conjunction with early results from the work we're doing, and the additional information that we get from the lessees who are assessing their sites after this first round of leasing. That's all valuable information that will help us better inform our decisions as we go forward and keep us on a track where we can move faster towards deployment.
Thanks. So Chuck, how do we balance this, the need for all of this data plus the need to rapidly develop these leases? What do we do there?
So,
That's
yeah.
perfect. I would
Yes, please, Jennifer.
So I was like, who are we talking to? Okay, I got very confused. I was like,
You
is
should
it
do
me?
it. I think you should
Take
start,
the
and then
question.
Chuck will
Okay.
follow you.
So, I mean, it's a complicated problem. I don't think there's any way around it. And so I can tell you how we're tackling it right now is we're using the information that we know, and then we're identifying the gaps that are missing, and we're trying to make the best decisions with the information we have and the urgency that we feel based on everything that's been said this entire day. And I don't want to take up all of the time, but that's really where our head is at. And I think, from BOEM's perspective, there are certain activities or uses that are simply incompatible with offshore wind. And so from that standpoint, they're not compatible. So you can't have those two uses. So you have to avoid those. And so then you look at the things that are maybe a little more yellow or a little more fungible, and you think, what kind of thing can we avoid? Can we minimize? Can we mitigate? And how do you define those unknowns? And that's really the way that we move through the decision tree.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I would embrace the decision tree as a kind of proven structure. I think I would recommend 3 things as a way to make it through the balancing dynamic, but none of them are guaranteed. One is those first 5 leases, or the group that goes first. I think you're going to live with us how we try to do monitoring in as a comprehensive data gap, data need driven way. It may feel onerous, but we need you thinking about that with us. Second, big believer in avoidance and minimization, which ties back to siting. Again, I don't think it's analogous to land. It's not an orange to an orange comparison. But we have experienced over the decades, if we have the space to talk about, could you just move over a touch? You open room for creativity and how you solve something. Third, I know I've been hammering it. I'll just do it again. This year, I've had to be involved in a difficult decision to close salmon fishing along the entire coast of California. when you're spending time with our port communities and our angling communities, come with an appreciation for what their lived experience is right now. It'll help us all.
That's right.
So thank you on that front.
Yep. So on that note, I want to thank our panelists. I know we run over a little bit, and thank the audience for being here. You guys are extraordinary, and we really appreciate all of your time. Thank you very much. Big round of applause for